Hi guys, today we're going to do lesson 31-3, graphing a quadratic function. Learning targets: use the axis of symmetry, the vertex, and the zeros to graph a quadratic function. Interpret the graph of a quadratic function. If a quadratic function can be written in factored form, you can graph it by finding the vertex and the zeros. All right, so example A. Example A is in standard form. So therefore, we can graph it using the vertex and the zeros. So we're going to do that by just kind of step by steps. And the first thing we want to do is we want to identify what A, B, and C is. So we go through here and we look and say, okay, the function is y equals x squared minus x minus 12. So the A is going to be 1, the B is going to be -1, and the C is going to be -12. Now, we don't really need the C for today's activity, but we're going to just get used to just identifying all three. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find the x value of the vertex. So that's going to be by using the axis of symmetry formula. It's going to be -b over 2a, and we just go ahead and fill it in. So it's going to be a negative, and then b is -1, and then we have 2 times 1. And then we have negative times a negative, so we have two negatives here. That's going to be a +1 over 2, or just 1/2. We could also write that as 0.5 if we want to. Okay, so after step 1, we know that the formula for the axis of symmetry is x is equal to 1/2. X is equal to 1/2, or 0.5. But what that really tells us is that the vertex is going to be 0.5, comma, something. In order to find out what that something is, what that y value is when x is equal to 1/2, is we're simply going to plug in the 1/2 into the original equation. So to find y, we're going to go ahead and plug it in. So it's going to be 0.5 squared minus 0.5 minus 12. Now, 5/10 squared is going to be 25 hundredths. Okay. And then 0.5, 12. And then we're going to go ahead and just figure this out. So 25 hundredths minus 5 hundredths is going to be -25 hundredths. Minus 12. And so it's going to be equal to -12 and 25 hundredths. And that's our y value, -12 and 25 hundredths. So that gives us the point where the vertex is. So we have 1 point already. So now what we want to do is go ahead and then take a look at what we're going to do next. And I'm going to write it on the other side. That's 1 point, the vertex. If we have 3 points, we can go ahead and have enough information to draw the graph. So we're going to go ahead and find the other 2 points by finding the zeros, the x-intercepts, of this particular function. So in order to do that, I'm going to start off with my equation, but what I'm solving for is my zeros, my x-intercept, and that's our x value when y is equal to 0. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to say y is equal to 0, and I'm setting the equation equal to 0. So that's what we call that, setting it equal to 0. So it's going to be x squared minus x minus 12 equals 0. We're saying y is equal to 0. So our x value is when y is equal to 0. So we'll go ahead and factor. X squared means the first one's going to be an x. The second sign tells me their signs are going to be different. The first sign tells me the sign of the largest factor. We're looking for factors of 12 that when you subtract them, we get 1. So of course that's going to be 4 times 3. 4 minus 3 is equal to 1. And since they're Answer has to be negative. The larger one has to be the negative. So we have x plus 3 times x minus 4 is still equal to 0. So now, in order for it to be equal to 0, either one of these two factors can be zeros. So we have x plus 3 is equal to 0, and that means we're going to have x is equal to negative 3. Or we're going to have x minus 4 is equal to 0, and that's going to give us x is equal to 4. So a negative 3 will make this whole thing 0, or a negative 4 or a positive 4 will make this equal to 0. So that gives us a couple more points that we can work with. Now, we're talking about these as being zeros. The points involved here, they're x-intercepts. So it's going to be negative 3, 0, and positive 4, 0. So what we have here is we have 3 points that we can graph that will help us be able to draw the function. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to pull the graph up here, hopefully right kind of in between here, yep. And then we're going to go ahead and plot these 3 points. So the first one is negative 3 is 0, and it's already on here, but I'm going to go ahead and mark it. It's negative 3 is 0. It's right there. And then we have 4, 0. That's going to be this one right here. Now, even if I didn't have the vertex, I could figure out where the axis of symmetry is, but that wouldn't help me with figuring out what the minimum or the maximum is. So I'm going to go ahead then and plot this point. That's going to be a 1/2, and each one of these is worth a half, and then down to negative 12, and that's going to be that point right there. So now I have enough points to be able to go ahead and draw the graph. Try these A. Check the graph in example A by plotting 2 more points on the graph. First, choose an x value, then find the y value by evaluating the function. Plot this point. Then plot the reflection of the point over the axis of symmetry to get another point. Verify that both points are on the graph. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the graph. What I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I want x to be equal to 2. Just pick the point. All right, and once I know that x is equal to 2, in order to find out the y value that corresponds with that, I simply do what I do with every other function. I plug it in. So we have the equation y is equal to x squared minus x minus 12. Okay. And so I'm just going to simply plug in the 2 for x. Y is equal to 2 squared minus 2 minus 12. 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 2 minus 12. And y is equal to 4 minus 2 is 2. And 2 minus 2 minus 12 is 10. Okay, so the answer is 10. All right, so that means I'm going to use the point 2, 10. I believe it's negative 10. Yes, negative 10. So I go over 2, go down negative 10, and sure enough, that point is right there on the graph. So then what we want to do is do the reflection across the axis of symmetry. Now remember, that's not the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is the line going down through the vertex. And so I count from here, I'm 1, 2, third one over. So this way I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and I'm on there as well. So that's going to be at negative 1, negative 10. Okay. So those are my 2 points that I was able to verify. All right, so we're still going to try these. Now we're going to graph the quadratic function by finding the vertex and the zeros, and we're going to check our graphs. Essentially what I'm going to do is find the 3 points. So the first thing we want to do is find out what the axis of symmetry is. That'll give me the x value of the vertex. So in order to do that, I have to identify A, B, and C. Really A and B, but I'm going to go ahead and do C as well, just so we get used to it. So it's going to be A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 2, and C is equal to negative 8. And I'm going to go ahead and use the formula. X is equal to negative B over 2A. and plug in the information. So it's -2, that's negative 2 over 2 times 1. All right, so we have 2 negatives here, so that means the answer overall is going to be positive. I have 2 over 2, which is equal to 1. So my axis of symmetry is x is equal to 1. My vertex has an x value of 1 and some y value. What is the y value? Well, we just simply plug it into the equation and we find our y value, just like we did before. So y is equal to 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 8. So it's 1 minus 2 minus 8. And 1 minus 2 is -1. So that's going to be -1 minus 8. So it's going to be -9. So that's our vertex. Okay. So now we have our vertex. What we want to do now is we want to go ahead and factor this and find out what the zeros are of this particular function. So it's going to be, we're going to set this equal to 0. So it's going to be x squared minus 2x minus 8. And that's equal to 0. We set it equal to 0, so we can go ahead and factor these. And I know because of x squared, that's going to be x and an x. The second sign tells me the signs are different. First sign tells me that the larger of the two factors is going to be negative, and I'm looking for factors of 8, and when I subtract them, I get 2. So of course, there's going to be 4, 2, and the 4 is going to be with the negative. All right, so those are my factors. Now I need to find out what the zeros are going to be. So I set them both equal to 0. So x plus 2 is equal to 0. That means x is -2. And x minus 4 is equal to 0, which means x is equal to 4. And of course, to make those points, the zeros are going to be -2, 0, and +4, 0. And now all I have to do is graph these 3 points, and it should give me the information I need to go ahead and draw the graph. Item C, we're going to try to figure out our A, B, and our C so we can find the vertex. But we'll notice here that it's not in standard form. So we just have to kind of rearrange these two. So what we have now is y is equal to -x squared plus 4x. And now we can go ahead and do our A, B, and C. Our A is equal to -1, our B is equal to 4, our C is equal to 0. Again, we're not using C, we're just doing that for practice. So our axis of symmetry is x is equal to -b over 2 times A. And we can go ahead and plug in. That's going to be -4 over 2 times -1. And again, I notice I have an even number of negative signs here, so the answer is going to be positive. And I have 4 over 2, which is going to be 2. So I know my vertex is going to be 2 and some y value. So what is the y value? Well, we simply plug it back in. You can use either one of these equations. It doesn't matter which one. Y is equal to 4 times 2 minus 2 squared. 4 times 2 is 8 minus 2 times 2, or 2 squared is 4. So 8 minus 4, y is equal to 4. So that's my vertex. So now the next thing I want to do is go ahead and factor this. So let's take a look. We're setting y is equal to 0, and y is equal to, I'm going to write it in standard form, so it's going to be -x squared plus 4x. And what I'm going to do is, because of this negative here, I'm going to factor out a negative of whatever my greatest common factor is. In this case, my greatest common factor is x. I'm going to factor out a -x. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and get the other factor. So -x divided by x squared is just x. And then -x, or 4x divided by -x is going to be -4. And so we look at this, and that negative really doesn't matter here. I could have actually even taken that out further and did a -1 here if I wanted to. It doesn't really matter because to get this one to be 0, x has to be equal to 0, regardless of whether it's positive or negative. And then the other one, x minus 4 equals 0. So therefore, I solve for x, x is equal to 4. Okay, so my zeros are x is equal to 0 and x is equal to 4. All right, so zeros, x is equal to 4, y is equal to 0. Or x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0. And x is equal to 4. X is equal to 4. And y is equal to 0. So again, we have these 3 points right here. Let's just look at these two to see whether or not we got them right. And I'm going to just go ahead and pull up the answers and see whether the graphs are there. I don't know whether they are. If not, I can just look at it later. So here's B, kind of in the way of this other stuff. But here's B, and the points I got was 1, -9. So it's going to be over 1 down -9. So that one's correct. And then I have -2, 0. So I have -2, 0. And then I have +4, 0. So these were correct. So let's go ahead and look at C. All right, looking at item C, and looking at the graph, it's kind of mixed in there, so I'll just go ahead and I'll do this in blue. So the vertex we had was at 2, 4. So it's at 2, 4. There you go, right there. And then, of course, we had the 0, 0, which is right there, and the 4, 0, which is right there. All right, so the first two we did pretty well. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at D. So the first thing we want to do, of course, is look and make sure it's in standard form. Then we want to go ahead and identify our A, B, and our C. So A is equal to 1. B is equal to 4, C is equal to -5. So we can go ahead and find the axis of symmetry as being at x is equal to negative, and then it's going to be B over 2 times A, and that's going to be 4 negative, and then 4 over 2 times 1. So I only have one negative sign here, so my answer is going to be negative. It's 4 over 2, which is going to be 2. So my x value of my vertex is going to be -2, and my y value is going to be some value. Okay. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and factor this to find the remaining points, the zeros of the graph. 0 is equal to x squared plus 4x minus 5. And we're going to go ahead and factor these. So we have our x there and x there. The back sign tells me the signs are going to be different. Front sign tells me the larger factor is going to be positive. We're looking for factors of 5 that when we subtract them, we get 4. So that'll be 5 and 1. And the 5 has to be the positive, and the 1 has to be the negative. So we set each of these equal to 0. X plus 5 equals 0, so therefore x is equal to -5. And x minus 1 equals 0, and so that's going to be x is equal to 1. So gives us our points, so that's going to be -5 and 0 and 1, 0. Now, as I look up here, I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't do that. Well, that's okay, I can do that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and solve for y, plugging in the x value of the vertex. So it's going to be y is equal to -2 squared. Now notice where I put the negative this time, because it's part of the x value, it's going inside the parentheses. Plus 4 times -2 minus 5. So -2 squared is going to be a +4 plus a -8 minus 5. Of course, that means to subtract. So 4 combined with a -8 is going to be -4 minus 5, which of course is -9. Okay, so now I have my 3 points that I can look at to see if well, to use to graph. And let's go ahead and take a look at it and see whether we got them right. All right, so we'll take a look at this now. We have our -2, -9, so that's that point right there. That's the vertex. We have our -5, 0, and we have our 1, 0. So it all works out. And this is what we would use to solve the graph. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Item 1, graph the projectile path on the coordinate axis below. Now it's already drawn for me because this is the teacher's edition on here, but that's okay. We're going to just go ahead and go through the process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put this in standard form. So we're going to have y is equal to -1/19 times x squared minus 18x minus 19. And we have to distribute this -1/19. So it's going to be -1/19 times x squared. And then we have our -1/19 times -18. So a negative times a negative is a positive, and it's going to be 18/19 x. And then again, our -1/19 combined with our -19, and negative times negative is positive. 19/19 is 1. All right, so now what we can do is go ahead and find our axis of symmetry, or x value. X is equal to -b/2 times a. And we're just going to plug these in. So we look for a, b, and c. So a is equal to -1/19. B is equal to 18/19. And C is equal to 1. So we'll go ahead and fill this in. B is 18/19. And 2 times A is -1/19. So let's go ahead and write this out as a division problem. So it's going to be 18/19 divided by -2/19. And so as we go ahead and keep change flip, we're going to do 18/19. Keep change flip. That's going to be 18/19. Now we're going to change it to multiplication, and it's going to be 19/2. The 19s cancel. 18 divided by 2 is, of course, just 9. So our x value of the vertex is going to be 9. So the vertex is going to be 9 and then some value. Well, we don't know what the value is, so let's go ahead and go back up to the top and find out what that value is going to be. So we'll go back to the original equation, and that's going to be y is equal to -1/19 times 9 squared minus 18 times 9 minus 19. Okay. And of course we can do that on our calculator if we have it. I don't happen to have mine, so I'm going to use my phone. So I'm going to go ahead and do everything inside the parentheses first, and then we'll worry about the rest. So this 9 squared is going to be 81 minus 18 times 9 . That's going to be 162 minus 19. And of course, we can add those together. It's -100. So that's going to be -1/19 times -100. So y is going to be positive, so I'm multiplying 100/19. Well, what does 100/19 become? 100 divided by 19 is going to be 5.26. So just a little bit over 5. So it's going to be 5.26. And there's that. So I have my vertex. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the graph. And the graph is showing that my x value is going to be 9. It's my axis of symmetry. And then I can see that the y value is just a little bit higher than 5. So that's going to be the 5.26. All right, so the next thing I need to do is go ahead and find the zeros. And this is kind of cool. I'm going to put this equal to 0. So it's going to be negative 1 over 19 times x squared minus 18x minus 19. Now, in this case, I do not distribute the negative 1 over 19 in, because if I distribute it in, it becomes the greatest common factor. And I would have to turn around and take it right back out. It doesn't make sense. So we're just going to go ahead and leave it out there by itself. And we're going to go ahead and factor this, and that's going to be an x and an x. The back sign is negative, so it tells me there's a plus and a minus. Front side's negative, so that tells me it's going to be the larger of the two factors is going to be the negative. Looking at factors of 19 that subtract to become 18, that's easy. That's 9 and 1. I'm sorry, 19 and 1. And 19 minus 1 is 18. And because it's negative, the 19 has to be here. The 1 has to be here. So that gives me my zeros. Again, we don't need to worry about that. These are the only two we have to worry about setting equal to 0, because if that's 0, the whole thing's 0. If that's 0, the whole thing's 0. So x plus 1 equals 0. X would be equal to negative 1. And x minus 19 equals 0. X is equal to 19. So those are my zeros, and if we're talking about them as points, it's going to be negative 1, 0, and 19, 0. So let's do the 19, 0 first. And you can see that that's right here, 19, 0, and that's kind of where the projectile lands. And then this one here, though, they shot it from a meter up in the air. Well, that's not a 0. That's not an x-intercept. But we have to kind of pretend, even though this isn't real, this really did not happen, to continue the graph, you would end up right here at negative 1, 0. Okay, that doesn't make sense as part of the answer. Doesn't make sense as part of the answer because it's a negative distance from the starting point. It doesn't make sense, but it is a 0. Okay, so let's just go ahead and move on. Item 2, make sense of the problems. Last year's winning trebuchet launched a projectile at a horizontal distance of 19.5 meters. How does the team's trebuchet compare to last year's winner? Looks like it comes just a little bit short. This trebuchet traveled 19 meters, so it just came short of the 19.5. All right, so I'm going to leave the check your understanding and the practice problems for you to do as homework. Again, if you have any questions, you certainly can come to tutoring weekdays at 3 o'clock via Zoom.